Hello everyone, and welcome to Dead History. Today we journey back to a conflict often overshadowed by the wars that came before and after it, yet one of the most brutal and pivotal events of the Cold War era, the Korean War. Our story begins in the ashes of World War II, a world struggling to find its footing, now precariously balanced on the edge of a new kind of global struggle. By 1950, just 5 years after the end of the Second Great War, the globe was cleaving in two. On one side stood the United States and its Western allies, championing democracy and capitalism. On the other, the Soviet Union and the burgeoning People's Republic of China, standard-bearers of communism. This ideological chasm, this Iron Curtain, was about to cast a long, dark shadow over a peninsula in East Asia, Korea. A land with a rich history stretching back millennia had been a single, unified nation for centuries. But now it was a nation divided. After its liberation from Japanese rule at the end of World War II, the victorious Allies drew a line across the 38th parallel. North of this line, a communist state emerged, backed by the formidable power of the Soviet Union. To the south, a democratic government was established under the protection of the United States. What was intended as a temporary division soon hardened into a permanent, hostile border. Two Koreas, two ideologies, two peoples torn apart by the geopolitical currents of the age. The fragile peace shattered before dawn on June 25, 1950. In a meticulously planned and sudden onslaught, North Korean forces, equipped with Soviet-made tanks and heavy artillery, stormed across the 38th parallel. The invasion caught the South Korean army and its American advisors completely by surprise. The initial assault was overwhelming. The capital city, Seoul, a vibrant hub of culture and life, fell within just 3 days. Its streets, once filled with the sounds of commerce and community, now echoed with the rumble of tanks and the crack of gunfire. The world watched in horror. The audacity of the invasion was a direct challenge to the newly formed United Nations and the post-war order it was meant to protect. Was this the first move in a global communist expansion? The question hung heavy in the air. In response, the United Nations Security Council, in a session boycotted by the Soviet Union, passed a resolution condemning the invasion and calling for military intervention. Led by the United States, a coalition of 16 nations committed troops to defend South Korea. This was the first major test for the UN, a moment that would define its role on the world stage. It was the start of a bloody and devastating conflict, a police action that would spiral into a full-scale war, drawing millions into its vortex of destruction. The Korean War had begun. The initial months were a desperate struggle for survival. Pushed back relentlessly by the powerful North Korean advance, South Korean and American forces found themselves cornered in a small pocket of territory around the southeastern port city of Busan. The Busan Perimeter, as it became known, was the last line of defense. Here, in the sweltering heat of the Korean summer, they fought with grim determination, holding on by a thread against wave after wave of attacks. The fate of South Korea, and perhaps the balance of the Cold War itself, hung in the balance on this sliver of land. Just when all seemed lost, the tide of the war turned dramatically. General Douglas MacArthur, the charismatic and controversial commander of the UN forces, conceived a plan of breathtaking audacity, an amphibious landing far behind enemy lines at the port of Incheon. Military planners deemed it a 1 in 5,000 gamble. The tides were treacherous, the defenses unknown. But on September 15, 1950, the gamble paid off. U.S. Marines stormed the beaches, catching the North Koreans completely off guard. The Incheon landing was a stunning success. With the North Korean supply lines severed, the UN forces broke out of the Busan perimeter. Seoul was recaptured after fierce urban combat, and the victorious troops surged north. Crossing the 38th parallel and advancing deep into North Korea, the momentum was unstoppable. They pushed towards the Yalu River, the border between North Korea and China. Victory seemed tantalizingly close. MacArthur famously declared that the boys would be home by Christmas. But as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, a new, formidable power was watching from across the river, and everything was about to change. In late October and November 1950, just as UN forces neared the Chinese border, the war took a terrifying and unexpected turn. China, fearing an American presence on its doorstep, entered the conflict. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese People's Volunteer Army troops secretly crossed the Yalu River, launching a massive surprise attack. They swarmed the unsuspecting UN forces with overwhelming numbers, their bugles and whistles creating a chilling cacophony in the night. The UN advance crumbled into a desperate, chaotic retreat. The winter that followed was one of the coldest in a century. Temperatures plummeted to 30, even 40 degrees below zero. The battlefield transformed into a frozen hell. Weapons froze, engines seized, and frostbite became as great an enemy as the opposing soldiers. Soldiers froze to death in their foxholes. The retreat from the chosen reservoir became a legend of survival and endurance, a brutal fight against both the enemy and the elements. Cities that had been liberated were lost again. Seoul changed hands for a fourth time. The dream of a quick victory had vanished, replaced by the grim reality of a long, agonizing war of attrition. By the spring of 1951, the fluid lines of advance and retreat solidified into a brutal stalemate, roughly along the 38th parallel where the war had begun. The conflict evolved into a nightmarish trench warfare, reminiscent of World War I for the next 2 years. The fighting was a relentless, bloody grind for inches of territory. Hills with names like Pork Chop Hill, Heartbreak Ridge, and Bloody Ridge became infamous killing grounds fought over, lost, and retaken countless times, each assault costing thousands of lives for little strategic gain. The war was fought not just in the trenches, but also in the skies, where American B-29 bombers rained destruction on North Korean cities, and the world's first jet versus jet dogfights took place in an area known as MiG Alley. It was a war of unimaginable suffering for the Korean people. Villages were obliterated, families were torn from their homes, becoming refugees in their own land. The devastation was total. For 3 long, agonizing years, neither side could achieve a decisive victory. Peace talks began, stalled, and began again, while the killing continued on the front lines. The human cost was staggering. Over the course of the war, it's estimated that more than 3 million people lost their lives. This includes nearly 37,000 American soldiers, alongside tens of thousands from other UN nations. The losses for the Korean and Chinese forces were far greater. But the highest toll was paid by the civilians, the innocent men, women, and children caught in the crossfire. An entire generation was scarred by the trauma of war, displacement, and loss. Finally, on July 27, 1953, after 2 years of grueling negotiations, an armistice was signed at Panmunjom. The guns fell silent. But this was not a peace treaty. It was merely a ceasefire. The war ended not in peace, but in a tense, unresolved stalemate. The Korean Peninsula remained divided along a new border, the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ. Families who had been separated by the war remained torn apart, many never to see their loved ones again. The division of Korea, once a temporary line on a map, was now a scar etched deep into the land and the hearts of its people. The Korean War became known in the West as the Forgotten War, overshadowed by World War II and the Vietnam War that followed. But its legacy is profound and enduring. It was the first hot war of the Cold War, demonstrating the terrifying potential for proxy conflicts between the superpowers. It cemented the division of Korea, a division that persists to this day. And it set a precedent for American military intervention around the globe in the name of containing communism. Even now, more than 70 years later, the Korean War has never officially ended. The DMZ remains one of the most heavily fortified and dangerous borders on Earth, a stark, physical reminder of the Cold War's long shadow. The story of the Korean War is a story of immense courage in the face of unspeakable horror. It is a story of geopolitical chess played with human lives. And it is a tragic tale of a nation divided and a people scarred by a conflict that time has not yet healed. It is a story that must not be forgotten. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past. If you found this story powerful, please show your support by liking this video, sharing it, and subscribing to Dead History. We believe that by understanding these conflicts, we can better understand our world today. Because here the past still breathes and every war tells a story.